federal government, when you look at the proposal, they have different sections that they award points for. And what they do is it's a peer review process, and they'll actually maybe ask some of you or some of other experts in the field to actually review the applications, score the applications, and then pick the best ones that are there. So basically, it's similar to a bidding process. So you're looking to see who has the best application and who is most capable, and you're trying to award the money fairly as possible. It's a very open process. That's why they have peer reviews as well. But for foundations, even submitting an application, it's more relational with a program officer. Like federal grants officers, there's high turnover sometimes, and they may be there one year, they may be gone the next year. For foundation officers, what you want to do for foundations is you want to make personal contact with the program officer. Sometimes on the website they'll tell you not to call. If they say that, don't call, because then it'll irritate the program officer. And actually, I should have asked Patrick to talk a little about it as well. But for foundations, because it's private, they actually don't have to reveal how they make the decision. And usually, at least from my experience, and just in my talks with other program officers, they don't go by a point scale. What they do is they evaluate each proposal. They evaluate whether or not each organization has the capacity to do what they're going to do. And then what they do is they have the program officers will lobby for which ones they think should get funding within a larger group. And ultimately, I believe it's the executive director or the board or whoever makes that final decision. But that's not privy to the public. They don't really say how they're going to be awarding the grants. So basically, if one year a foundation changes their focus, like maybe from arts to youth, they can do that. But for federal funding, it needs to get approved, and it needs to have legislation, and then a formal announcement like this has to be sent out. So hopefully that answers your question. And as you'll see, I think federal grants are a lot harder to write, more difficult because of all the different pieces. The language isn't very clear, and they're usually much longer than foundation grants as well. Next section, design and structure of the initiative. There's one question here is, how many awards will Department of Labor make to these counties? One per county. Does that bode well for your chances of getting the grant? No, it's very, very slim. Now at this point, what you would want to do is you want to because federal grants take up a lot of time. They take up a lot of time, a lot of resources. If you have a team, great. But if sometimes you're just by yourself, and you're trying to put together a large proposal together. At this point, if your chances, you have to evaluate what your chances are of getting a proposal. And if they're only going to award one per county, you have to think you're going to be competing against other groups. It's not to discourage you, but it's to reevaluate where you're going to invest your resources. Whether or not you think you'll have a good chance. If you have a very strong program, great, go for it and apply for it. But if you're just up and running and you're kind of in the middle stage and you're just about there where you think you can hit maybe 3 of the objectives and not all of them, then you want to just reevaluate and just assess whether or not this is something that you want to go for. Applying for a grant is always good. You always want to. It's a great experience going through it. But sometimes when you get the grant, that's when that's when you really have to think, why did I even apply for this? A few years ago, we had applied for a grant, and I think it was about for $500,000 or something. It was a 2-year project, and my boss and I, we were actually glad that we didn't get it. Because that was a project that we just kind of threw together, and we were halfway through it, and we're like, okay, let's just do it. And then when we got the final product, we weren't really happy with, but we just submitted it anyway. And in hindsight, we resubmitted it the following year, and we got it, and it was a much better project. So we were very glad that we didn't get it the first time. So submitting a proposal, and if you don't have the capacity to do it, it actually might hurt you in the long run, because once you get a grant, and if you can't perform well, and if you want to apply to the same agency, what they'll do sometimes, if you're a previous awardee, they'll ask what your previous experience was, what your previous success rate was. And so if it wasn't very strong, then the next time you apply, it doesn't look very good. Some of the grants that I review, they do ask what your previous past performance was, and that's actually maybe half the points of one of the sections. So they ask you, did you spend the money well? Did you reach your goals? And did you perform the way you said you were going to do? And if it can come back and bite you, because you can't go back in time, and you can't redo or undo what you would have liked to have done. And in that section, if it's like 15 or 20 points, if you didn't do well, that's like maybe half the points are gone right there. And that's nothing that you can change or get a partner to overcome.
Hey, I have a question about, you said if you get the grant and then you end up not being able to meet all the things you said you're going to do, that could hurt you?
Yeah.
What if you apply for a grant and you really aren't strong enough? Would that hurt you at all, do you think? Like, could have your name out there and they're like, you're wasting our time, you clearly haven't met this? Or is it good just to submit something?
So the question is, if you submit something and you don't think it's a strong proposal and you don't get the funding, will that be seen negatively for your organization?
Right.
Okay. No, not necessarily, because I think the funding, at least from the program officers that I've worked with, the agencies that I've worked with, they want to give the money to the best project. And what they're doing is, if you submit 1 year and if it's not very good, what the federal government usually does, and this is the difference between foundations and federal government. Foundations won't always do this, but for federal government, if you if you submit a proposal and you don't get it, you can ask them for the comments for each of the sections as to why you did not get the funding. And when you get those comments, you incorporate it into your new proposal if you want to resubmit, and you look to strengthen the proposal. So even though you submit and you don't think it's a very strong one, I mean, you definitely don't want to waste the reviewer's time. You definitely want to submit something that you think is okay. It may not be the best, but I would say go ahead and submit it anyway, because this is what I found is, at least for our organization, this is a lot of how I've learned, is when we submitted a proposal, even though we didn't get it, it continued to build capacity within the organization. Even though you don't get it, you might not get it this time around, but the work that you've done and the foundation that you've laid in, finding out who the business manager, who's going to do the budget piece, who's going to do the other, who's going to write these other different pieces. Even though you don't get it for that time, you lay the foundation for a future proposal, maybe more money, maybe more of a project that you actually want to go for. So you may not think that you have the best proposal out there, but I would say, as an organizational capacity perspective, if you can submit for a proposal and you think you have a decent chance of getting it, I would say go ahead and do it. But it doesn't look negatively on you from the organization, from a foundation, from their standpoint.